Hi, everyone. Welcome to your next section at RETCON. This panel is called Battle of the Brands, using technology to market your properties in a competitive market. I'll go ahead and welcome our panelists to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Caroline Gould. I'm Vice President of Marketing for Fore Property Company based in Washington, D.C.
I'm Scott Berka. I'm the Senior Managing Director of our Global Branding and Customer Experience, currently in Raleigh.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Gomes. I'm the Chief Experience Officer with Cortland, based here in Atlanta.
Hello, everyone. My name is Indy. I'm the VP of Product Marketing and Platform at Matterport, based in Sunnyvale, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Bretz, and I'm the Chief Experience Officer for TWG in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Great. Well, we'll go ahead and get things kicked off. First question, in a competitive market, and what really isn't a competitive market these days, how do you feel technology is helping set not just your properties, but also your brand apart from others?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one. So the way we think about it at Greystar is it sets us apart in a couple areas. And, as I mentioned, I look after the customer experience, as do a few others on this panel. And we think about it in terms of the prospect part of the experience and then the resident part of the experience. And I think technology actually drives each of those in very different ways. So on the prospects part of the experience, I think we all are very aware of what the trend in virtual leasing and touring has done. Self-guided touring has become increasingly prevalent. There's a lot of ways that I think technology has enabled us to adapt to the pandemic, which we've had to adapt. It's adapt or not survive in a lot of cases. So there's a lot of very evident, I think, changes from a technology standpoint with the prospect part. On the resident side, so for the residents who are currently living in the building, it's really much more pervasive than that. And I don't think it's changing quite as quickly, certainly not with regards to the pandemic. But if you think about technology being everything from the app and the resident portal that someone interacts with to the building systems, IoT devices, there is so much that we can unlock with technology that I think we're really just scratching the surface on in most cases. And that's something that we're kind of actively looking at. There's so much potential in terms of what we can do with technology that I don't think we're really truly taking advantage of today.
At Cortland, Caroline, we started a specific brand strategy initiative really towards the end of 2018. Probably been on that journey for about 2 years. There's two big buckets. There's both the awareness of your brand, and then there's what your brand stands for and what your reputation is in the marketplace. The awareness really affects the prospect part of the experience primarily, and your reputation is both a output from your current resident experience, but it serves as an input to your prospect experience. In other words, as I was fond of saying to my team, I don't want our brand to be aware. I don't want anyone to be aware of our brand if we're really bad at what we do in terms of our delivery. But if we believe we're good at what we do, in our recent monitoring of our reputation.com results or J Turner results that measure our online reputation, if it is strong, then let's stand behind that and let's make more and more people in our core markets where we operate aware of the Cortland brand. And there's a variety of ways to do that. But the effort that we started wasn't just to build the brand awareness, but also when you then came to the front door of our experience, which is our website, we found the web platform to be extremely limiting in the very templatized structure that seems to exist in multifamily. So we embarked on a complete rebuild of that platform, building it in a way that not only would build regional presence for us across the regions where we operate and the markets we operate, but also provide much more flexibility and capability for that prospect well in advance of COVID. And so what ended up happening for us is as COVID then set in and more people had to rely on the capabilities of your web experience, we'd already built the platform that gave us so much more capability and flexibility that would have served us well regardless, but we were well positioned when COVID hit to help provide the most visually enriching, self-service oriented prospect experience than we otherwise may have been had we started later on that part of our journey.
That's a great point, Mike. And you talk about getting out ahead of these things and adding these initiatives back in 2018. And now that thankfully you've been proactive, and that's certainly been a benefit. Is there anything that anyone on the panel has since added to their roadmap that might have not been there before the pandemic as it relates to technology?
Yeah. Hi, this is Ken. We basically try to utilize a lot of tools that we already had, but maybe try to use them in very different ways. So we have resident portals. I think that's becoming more prevalent, where you have a platform for residents to be able to put in service requests, make online rent payments. But we really try to expand upon the functionality to provide more service to our prospects and our residents 24/7. So whether that was utilizing and beefing up our platform to allow our residents to book amenities 24 hours a day, to use different services around the ability. We added a virtual doorman to a lot of our properties so that we could prevent people from having to touch as many services. They could let their guests in or prospects in remotely. So really trying to rethink some of the things we already had and kind of beef them up to improve customer service, but also kind of keep more of our prospects, residents, and staff members safe.
Yeah. Great. I think you touched on something important as well, Ken. We've talked a lot about prospects and residents, but another important stakeholder as we use technology in a new way amid the pandemic and beyond is thinking about our on-site team members. I'm reminded, Mike, of what you said. What good is brand awareness if the product isn't good? And who is really responsible for that product at the frontline level, but are very important site teams. That's a great point, Ken. I think it's a good segue to next question. How has technology impacted your creativity when it comes to branding and marketing?
I have a lot of personal strong opinions about this. I come from agency world, so I spent my first career working at ad agencies. I actually think technology directs us both ways on this question. So I think it enables us to be more creative in some ways because technology affords the ability to personalize, right? So as you think about how do we deliver something that's relevant to, if you think about someone who's doing some online shopping, we can know what other things they're looking at. We can then customize messaging relative to what that specific person wants. And I think that unlocks a different level of creativity when you know more about a specific person's mindset. I'm sure there are creative directors who may or may not agree with that comment, but I personally believe that. I think the counterpoint to that, though, is technology allows us to be much more data-driven. So no longer can we say, hey, we have a good feeling about this creative or this brand or whatever. It has to be proven, right? So A/B testing is now the king of what is best in terms of creative. No longer can someone say, oh, I really like this design more, because I'm always going to say, great, how did it do in terms of A/B testing? So I do think it can cut both ways.
Yeah. If I can just jump in on that too, and I think we were talking about the pandemic earlier as well, right? Which we're obviously still all living through. But if anything, I think it's been an accelerant to what we're seeing on the technology provider side of things. So Matterport, we're one of the leaders in 3D spatial data and collaboration. And we work with a lot of companies like this, and to help real estate companies promote their properties. And what we saw with the pandemic was a huge influx of demand for just the services, right? Like creating virtual tours, which we always knew was promising. I used to work at WeWork before this, and we saw with virtual tours that people could reserve and get space sight unseen, right? Because they knew what to expect from the brand which we were touching on. But right away, that ability to kind of just immerse yourself in the space and discover it, click through it, really lent itself to that. And when it comes to marketing, then if you're trying to promote your properties and get people to kind of step in, right? Like what we're seeing, at least on our side, is that there's just with the current situation, if anything, that's the minimum viable kind of thing you want to try and do, right? If you're trying to get people to kind of visit your spaces and try to make decisions, I think having something or a rich immersive environment like a virtual tour, I think is going to be paramount, right? I think what we see is that a lot of folks, there's a stat that we recently did from our research that says 70% of buyers would be, interested in purchasing properties sight unseen, as long as there's a 3D tour. So I think, the power that technology can kind of bring into that process, I think it has been accelerated by what we're seeing with the pandemic. but I think it's honestly here to stay, right? I think if there's a better way for you to kind of promote your properties, be really creative and show all the goodness that there is and really differentiate yourself as a provider, I think, that's one of the things. And I think we're seeing this pattern in many ways, right? We're all on Zoom today. I think we're all like, avoiding like our daily commutes in some ways. And maybe part of that is probably some of that stuff is here to stay. So I think, when I think about how, technology is helping us with our marketing personally as a technology provider, is that, sometimes the technology speaks for itself, but it's also something that is an accelerant to everything that we're trying to do.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, Indy, right? And it's happening across a multitude of industries. One of the philosophies we've had internally has been, let's not do something because it's the pandemic. Let's do something because it was still consistent with the 3 to 5 year strategic vision we had. To your point on Matterport, which we're a significant user of, or interactive site maps, these were already plans. In some cases, we had already rolled them out across part of the portfolio and they were marching along. And we might have said, okay, let's push them along faster. But the notion isn't, oh, these now go away post-pandemic when we're back to whatever the new normal's like. So we tried to avoid doing one-off things that aren't sustainable over time just to satisfy a near-term unique need associated with the pandemic. So it's been more accelerating things that we're already planning to do rather than, oh, well, I guess we got to go do something that we're going to throw away in 18 months anyway, Yeah.
And I think, Mike, that's a great point. Let's not do something just because it's the pandemic, I think is a nice tie into what Scott was saying earlier. Let's not just do things just because anecdotally we feel like it or think it's good or have a certain personal reaction to it. I always say to my team, we don't do things because they're cute. Cute is for cats. We have the data here with us to kind of make those informed decisions. And Indy, I think of what you said about 70% of people being comfortable with taking a next step sight unseen. And we had a little bit, slow traction with virtual tours at the beginning, but just this past week at one of our properties, our busiest property, half of the applications we got in this week were sight unseen apps, people who had virtually toured and not physically come to the community. So we are certainly starting to see the data and react from that. Pivot a little bit here and really interested, Scott and Mike in particular, in what you have to say about this, but how does an operator's brand come into play? When you are at a Greystar property, you immediately know it's a Greystar property, even if you're not in the industry. With Cortland, the name is right there in the brand. So how influential is a well-known operator in driving traffic, and what role, and we talked about this a little bit already, but what role does technology play specifically in promoting the brand from the operator's level?
So I'll start. One of the pieces that I found a little interesting, I've only been in multifamily for just under 3 years now, right? And had been in other businesses before. From a business to consumer play, I was very surprised to see how few companies actually had a brand that you could recognize. We even did some research with current renters around what are the various name a property manager, and the number one answer was, I don't know. And these are people who live in apartments today, right? And that's because they're named cutesy names. To your point, cute is for cats. Let's name it 2512 Main. What the hell does that mean, right? The Galleria. So because the naming paradigm is so unique, it's almost as if everybody wants to hide from their brand. And we know there's investor implications, et cetera. So anyway, part of our brand strategy had been to start to build awareness by just simply owning the name with a consistent paradigm like Cortland. And then we had to go, well, how are we going to measure whether or not this is resonating at all? So this is less about technology per se than how you could then measure the impact. And what we have found is using the generic search term of Cortland apartments and comparing that to all other apartment companies in the region in which we operate. Before we started, we might have been last on the list in, say, DFW. We're now first on the list of the people who type in Cortland apartments organically. That's organic search. That is fundamentally free prospects that then come to our website. And then we could subsequently measure, because we changed the front door of our web experience, how many more leads were we generating through that pathway, and how more effective we were in converting those leads through our web channel than we may have previously been. So in some cases, that's less purely about technology than the digital paths that our prospects follow, all of our prospects follow, to Scott's point, becomes so measurable now. You could start to indicate this notion of your brand and the reputation that hopefully we have that's positive amongst people are getting people to intentionally seek us out. Therefore, that is a positive flywheel effect that we think can only grow over time, so long as we continue to meet the brand promise that we set for our residents. The moment we falter from that, then we could end up in a negative factor overall. So it's a different way to answer the question, but it's how we thought of brand in the marketplace and then how it would play through to generate prospect traffic in a valuable way.
Yeah, and I might want to emphasize something you said. And Carolyn, in your question, I think you kind of made the presumption or statement that actually the Greystar brand is somewhat well known. And if anything, we find the opposite. Greystar, our structure makes it fairly complicated. So we manage 2,500 communities. Some of those we manage for other owners, some of those are through our JVs. So there's quite a range of different stakes and vested interests across those 2,500 properties. But I think pretty consistently, we've found exactly what Mike found, that there's really not high awareness of Greystar. And every one of our properties is, not all of them, but most of them have their own unique name, 2512 Main, whatever Mike's example was. Every building wants to have its own thing, and that's fine. That's the way this industry grew up. So I actually don't think we're starting from any sort of significant advantage, frankly. The way we're approaching it at Greystar, and this is something we're actively making changes with now, is actually on 2 layers. So the first is, how do we think about brands from a more strategic sense and actually take it all the way back to what's the consumer group that we care about, right? What does that group want out of the housing? What's their need? What's the value proposition that we're delivering for them? And then what's the name and the logo that goes along with that? And we're in the process of actually starting to create a series of brands as opposed to just one that actually correspond to specific needs. So actually in market now, we've got a number of active adults, so 55 and older communities that have a set of consistent brand names. And we want to take that approach and use it more generally across all of the segments of the market. So that's one layer. The second layer is we are also actively engaging in how do we take Greystar and make it more known? And I think it's something that Mike, it sounds like is further ahead in terms of Cortland and how that has worked. But that is something that we are actively exploring, across the top of all of those properties.
I just wanted to add too, because I think I represent maybe the other end of the spectrum as a much smaller operator than Scott and Mike's companies, but we kind of experience both sides of that. So we have a pretty strong presence in the Indiana market because we have a really strong density of our portfolio here, but we increasingly are moving into markets where we are starting our first project and there is no brand awareness. They don't know what a TWG is and what sort of experience and how we approach property management. So we do rely a lot on individual property brands and persona mapping and kind of really figuring out who the renter is there, because there may be something that we do in our Indianapolis market that makes no sense and it doesn't really benefit us to really push the TWG brand. We want to lean more heavily onto the individual properties brand. But in Indianapolis, it's completely the opposite. We cross-leverage leads. We have such good, strong brand awareness in the market that someone will go to one property and then our software platform, which is RealPage, One-Site Leasing and Rents, our property managers can then take a lead and push it into the system and move it over to another property manager and say, hey, I just had an awesome tour with this person. We can't help them, can you? So we have kind of both sides of that experience.
I'll just quickly add also, like, I think I'll probably have more of like an orthogonal view on some of this, right? Whether you're like a big operator or a smaller operator. I think with Matterport, what we're seeing is that, and it's, part and parcel with our approach to technologies, right? I think is like, we want to like a lot of folks will, have like a great name for like their property, or they'll just have the address, right? And I think we give our customers a lot of flexibility as to how they want to label their models, right? And but I think where there's some opportunities is sometimes depending on how strongly you feel about like leading with that brand, whether listing or what even the portal you're putting it on, right? I think there's also some opportunities once you click through the model and when you're like, visiting things to embed like what we call it matter tags, but basically things, just think of it as like labels and annotations. And I think that's where your brand, whether you're a larger operator or like a more like a niche specialty operator can come into play, right? Because then you can augment people's understanding. They're here already. And it's almost like, going back to the model of a virtual tour, normally, you might have like some realtors who will talk about, oh, Greystar properties are like this and XYZ, that kind of thing. You can actually embed that information in the tours, right? So I think that's also where the brand can be just, sprinkled throughout the tour as well. You can harken back to links that talk about, your approach to like development and that kind of thing without having to kind of have it plastered on the top of the property you're on the listing to, right? So and I think it's, you think about it, it's like, it's a wonderful way to kind of get people's attention, because like the more that their attention is in the tour, then that's when you can kind of sprinkle that information too. So I'm a big fan of like brand where it's not, and branding where, and I think this personally resonates, is where it's not like kind of like, just big and loud, right? Like, but I think the more you're interested, presumably, then the more you'll be comparing, being like, hey, well, what is this operator's approach to multifamily homes versus others? And I think that's where you can embed your specialty, your expertise, and what your brand's all about.
It's interesting that naming came up so prevalent. A few semesters ago, I'm in graduate school, and I created for one of my projects a website called apartmentnamegenerator.com, because I felt that we just saw a lot of the same names over and over again. I'm like, there has to be something to this. So I made this algorithm that made about 20,000 combinations of apartment names and apartment taglines along some certain themes. And I talked about the business case and how this is such an issue. And we go through all this headache with naming and what does naming mean? We spend this money and we spend this time. And I present this project, and about 4 of my classmates were like, oh, I never thought about what my apartment building was named. Like, I know my address, but oh, okay, cool. So it's interesting, Mike, and what you were saying about using the name as a digital strategy to help gain recognition. And Scott, what you were saying as well about creating the strata of brands within Greystar to get some equity there. And again, I think the way you do things at TWG is probably similar at Fore, where we have much more of a focus on the property level branding than going into one of our apartment communities. You won't see the name Fore anywhere the way you might see a sign that says Greystar or see Cortland. So lots of different ways to leverage it. But I think one thing that we're all seeing is there's more to just a name. How do we play with this a little bit more? Kind of just putting a name on a community, there's actually a lot more opportunity for growth and recognition and equity there than just putting a name on a community, whether that's an individual name or whether that's an operator name. So this is one thing that everyone's talked about since our first question. We're talking about reputation. We're talking about Jay Turner. We're talking about Aura scores. How does technology help build trust in a brand? And just Mike, going back to what you said earlier that I love, if there's no point in creating awareness if it's not a great product. So we'll start with you. How are you using technology to create trust?
So, if you truly believe that the customer experience in its holistic sense is really made up of all of the individual engagement and interactions that customer has with you, even when they're a prospective customer or an existing customer. And I mean all of them, right? So in the industry, one of the things that was interesting is technology is largely outsourced in the whole industry, right? And part of my background is I spent 20 years at Disney. Disney's not going to outsource almost anything, right? It's going to own every single part of the theme park experience, even though that means it's building its own ticketing platforms, it's building its own hotel reservation management systems so that Disney can deliver the experience the way that it wants. According
I'm sorry to interrupt, but why do you think that we were in this position of just defaulting to outsourcing when it comes to technology? And I see Scott is smiling.
Well, remember, I've only been in the industry 2.5 years, so I don't know how the 20 plus 30 years has gotten us to this point. But I think it's all related. Nobody seems to care about their brand in this space. The customer has never been the resident. It's been the investor who, no offense, doesn't care about your brand. They care about their return. They want the cheapest possible technology solution. It's actually a race to the bottom in costs, right? There's this belief of you can't actually generate alpha through the top line performance, despite the fact all of us are talking about how we're trying to do that. And instead it's, why are you spending an extra $8.42 marketing per door? Because I don't do that anywhere else, right? Therefore your technology solutions. I mean, it's interesting that a company like Salesforce, who's the biggest CRM player in the world, doesn't touch multifamily. Doesn't mean that some people haven't implemented it, but it's kind of like nobody wants that overall. So yeah, it's also the reason that we develop property management solutions, where in an environment where the whole world has gone to customer relationship management for the last 25 years, we still run our systems based on the property, based on the physical asset, not based on who the customer is, right? So you've got to change that whole notion, and the industry at large hasn't ever felt the need to move in that direction. Plus, you've got a duopoly of sorts of players who have built systems. In my former life, I was with Mercedes-Benz Stadium and the Atlanta Falcons. Ticketmaster was the same type of thing. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And knowing the importance of tickets, you could modify the experience as much as you could, but you still were running on Ticketmaster's experience. That's the same case here. So your ability to use technology to positively interact with your prospects or your residents in a way that not only allows them to achieve what their goal is, but allows them to subconsciously say those things that they don't articulate. That was easy. That was simple. That was engaging. That was, it knew who I was. It felt personalized to me. Those things all add up. And we have an industry that has a technology set of platforms that aren't based in that direction. So that's where we've been pushing our co-development platform partners, which has been part of our solution, is not to build it ourselves, but let's to leverage third-party platforms to take them in directions that meet our goals for our customer experience and our overall, go-to-market strategy. So,
Mike, I want to offer us maybe an alternative take on why we are where we are. I don't necessarily disagree with anything you've suggested. I think I come from it with an added layer, though, and I've only been in the industry for a year, so I have even less data points to go off of, but still have an opinion. So I actually think, in addition to what you've said, where historically I agree, this has been very much a let's focus on the property and the ROI. Absolutely, that's part of why we're here. I think another reason, and I come from other industries, so I worked at McKinsey & Company and primarily in financial services and retail. Relative to those sectors and really most other sectors, the fragmentation in this particular industry is enormous. So, and even today, that's still the case, but it was more so true in the past. I mentioned we have 2,500 assets that we manage today. We still have less than 2% market share. Like, it's tiny. And I think the result of that is no one's really had the scale to invest and own any technology themselves, because the places I've seen that be effective, and Mike, Disney, you probably know this better than I will, but it requires scale to be able to get the ROI on tech investment. And I think up to this point, no one's had that. So the result of that is you have to partner, and the partners can get scale by serving multiple operators. So I think that's a big part of why we are where we are. And I agree that is starting to change. And I think the result of that is, the folks on this call bring a different perspective that's outside the industry. So that helps, but there's also starting to be more consolidation that I think lends itself to that type of scale moving forward.
I feel that that's spot on. I was going to make the similar point about fragmentation. I think, I think there was a time, where you have folks on this side of the house, right? Like operators, and brokers who have like the subject matter expertise and all these properties that they're across, right? And because of that fragmentation, they market them the best way they know how to, right? And then you have technology providers who have never focused on like this niche type of or industry per se. But Mike, you were talking about Salesforce. I was there about 10 years ago, and at the kind of the early stages of like the App Exchange marketplace and that platform. And we did actually have a couple of partners who came in and saying like, hey, Salesforce, we love your technology, and we are subject matter experts in the real estate business, and we'd love to build a Salesforce for real estate. So, I'm sure that arc has kind of since evolved, but I remember there was a company called Property Base that did just that. I don't know how much traction they got, but I think you're probably seeing a natural evolution once you have like these subject matter experts or these big operators. And I love the example of Disney that's like all vertically integrated, because I think every company now is going to become a technology company in some ways, right? Like, I think there's no going back to saying like, you're going to do things like the old way, or you're not going to just be able to, pick and choose the best of breed technologies to kind of like, build your own solutions, right? I think we've come to the point where in information technology, you can literally pick like the best solution to meet your needs, right? You don't have to go with like one monolithical kind of player anymore. Like, we're seeing this a lot in the enterprise. We're seeing this, you know, when I was at WeWork, for example, like we were building our own stack just by ourselves, but also using off-the-shelf components like, like Twilio or Stripe, those kind of things to kind of like, package up like our own technology solutions together. So I think we were probably in this place you were talking about, Caroline, many years ago, because that technology was not readily available, and you could not match the technology with the subject matter expertise that was coming in from our field. But I think that playing field has been evened out now, and I think it's more and more easy for people, whether they're large or small, to kind of hire a developer, kind of build their own strategy, especially if they're like a larger player, to kind of like just kind of build the technology stack that's going to power their needs. So, I've been in a number of companies where, I've seen this pattern only become stronger with time, like what Salesforce was what I was mentioning earlier. I was also at like MuleSoft, which is like a middleware company that helps any company take what they have in their IT standpoint and then kind of stitch it up together to build modern applications that are on mobile and whatnot, right? So I think it's only a matter of time before you see more and more of these larger players kind of be comfortable to be able to kind of just either buy or build their own technology stack.
Can I just add, Ken said something earlier that I think was important for Cortland as well. And that is, in some cases, our brand strategy, or in many cases, our brand strategy is a direct connection to our Cortland investment strategy. And what I mean by that is, when Ken said that they own a lot in Indianapolis, so therefore their brand is better known and they can cross-market and cross-sell, we have a very specific market investment strategy that has us as the largest owner-operator in DFW. We're the largest owner-operator, I think, in Atlanta. We may be the largest overall in the whole state of Texas. If we own one in Pittsburgh or we own one in Indianapolis, the Cortland brand is going to mean nothing. It's not going to have, so it's a market-specific level of brand strategy we're pursuing. Maybe at some point we get large enough through scale, to Scott's point, that we do care that our brand resonates in other cities and locations. But today, our brand strategy is a result of our investment strategy. And when Ken mentioned that, I thought that was a smart point that he made, that, standing for something in Indianapolis makes sense for his company. Standing for something in Dallas doesn't, right? If they only have one or two properties there. So now, unlike Scott, who's got one like in every town and city.
Right, but I think the great point that Scott makes is, we on this panel feel that Greystar is so prevalent, it's still 2% market share, even at that size. That feels enormous to us. And I think as we continue to talk about brand, real estate, multifamily is completely market driven, and every market is completely different, even ones that are close to one another. So moving on, and this is Mike, this is something that you spoke about before as well, talking about the focus being on the asset and now shifting the focus to the resident and the prospect. So how do we feel technology can enable operators to focus on that resident and focus on that more customer relationship building than just on straight asset performance? What metrics are you guys looking at?
From a traditional kind of metric standpoint, non-financial, right, is we're a pretty significant heavy user of Kingsley. We also very much pay attention to our online reputation. Both of those we want to see increase year over year. With Kingsley in particular, when I had joined, one of the pivots I'd asked for them to make with respect to all of the data is not to measure satisfaction. I'm fond of saying, if you measure satisfaction, be careful, you might get what you wish for, because no one is trying to build a satisfactory experience. You're either building something that is excellent, that is delighting and thrilling your customers, or you're building something that is just satisfaction. Something that is satisfying isn't going to build level of advocacy, loyalty, et cetera. So we've pivoted all of our operational related metrics on and with correlating models around what's important to the resident based on the behaviors that they then exhibit, whether they be retention behaviors, et cetera. And then we have accountable metrics that includes part of the bonus for our staff is not just based on NOI, right? It's not just what you achieved, it's how you achieve it. Are you continuing to improve the service delivery with respect to the move-in experience or maintenance and service elements of the experience? So We've also brought all of that Kingsley data into our data lake, so we can actually tie it to resident profiles as well. And we can see trends over time, comparing ourselves to ourselves, community to community, region to region. Once again, with the goal being continued, we need to improve. It was easy to use COVID as an excuse, by the way, of, oh, well, you know, this is a year where maybe your customer experience will slide because you've got to cut a lot of things. You know, I think great companies figure out how to enhance their productivity, lower their expenses while increasing their customer experience year over year. It's not an either or, it's a both and. I think that's an imperative. So we challenged our teams to get better and more connected to our residents using old-fashioned techniques. Pick up the phone and call them. Everybody's home. See how they're doing. Is there anything else we can be doing to help you? You know, in some cases, they were just thankful we called them. That was it. Like, wow, who does that? In other cases, they were like, you know what? I have an underlying condition and I can't get to the grocery store. Great. One of our service managers went and did shopping for the person or helped them set up an online grocery delivery because they didn't know how to do it. So we have countless of those examples, but sometimes it isn't about technology more than it's about the mindset of how do you use tools already at your disposal to truly demonstrate that you care for your residents and they're not just unit 2110, but they're actually Mr. and Mrs. Jones, you know, who lived with you for 2 years and one of them might have lost their job. The more you can treat people like that level of individual, that's how we want to hold our teams accountable on, are we improving the experience in that regard?
Yeah, I was going to say kind of very similar to Mike, like we focus more on using our metrics and using platforms like we use Meet Sochi for reputation management, because we're not so much trying to measure satisfaction, but we're really trying to make our residents and our past residents brand ambassadors. So if we can have multiple points of positive contact throughout the residents' lifeline and lifetime with us as a resident there, we found that that can have a profound impact on them recommending us to their peers, because we all know that people buy from people. So we try to make sure that using our real page software that we have a lot of surveys, we are constantly kind of checking our residents' temperatures, because like Mike said, you know, if residents become kind of denigrated to like whatever their unit number is, and you only talk to them if there's a rent violation, you really lose a lot of opportunities to understand areas for growth, areas of improvement, and kind of getting in front of issues. So we really use our property management software for that end. And we try to utilize a lot of other products too that allow our teams to focus on like relationship building and less on problem solving. So if there's a way for us to have them kind of put in their service requests online, they can book an amenity, they can get packages delivered on their own. That way, when they do need to reach out, our teams are freer to have those one-on-one conversations, because there's an issue related to their employment. They're worried about losing their job, or they're having an issue with their neighbor. So it frees up our teams and give them more bandwidth to kind of focus more on those like important one-on-one interactions that happen.
And I think that's really important. And I want to say something that's maybe controversial given the title of this conference. And I think Ken and Mike, you'll both agree with me. Indy, I'm curious your perspective here, but I think as often as not, thinking of the statement, how can technology better help our residents, is a problem as much as it is a solution. And a big part of what we're trying to do at Greystar is not worry about whether something's technology or operations or data. And Ken and Mike, I know what you both just said is similar. And it's like, we need to put the customer at the center of the decision making, not say, hey, what technology should we push down the way? Or hey, what operations changes do we need to do on site? Every one of these functions is doing the best they can, right? We have our technology teams who are really trying to make the residents better off. We've got the on-site teams that are really every day. They know the names of the residents. They interact with them all the time. Like they do that. The problem I'm seeing is we just don't connect those enough. And that's actually a big thing that we are focused on at Greystar, is saying, how do we actually take a customer back view and connect the technology with the data, with the operations, with the customer feedback, and actually merging all of those into one team that's making decisions about, hey, we may have the best technology, but oftentimes The problem isn't the technology, it's the handoff to on-site. And that if that's not done correctly, you could have the best piece of technology and it just doesn't make the experience any better. So that's something that, as controversial as that may be, given that we're talking about technology, I think is really critical to how we get it right with residents.
Yeah, when you involve the people, Scott, it gets harder, right? So, when we did Indy, the Matterport or some of the other web-related engagements, small team, prioritize it, work with web vendor, put it in the testing environment, get it the way you want, push it out the door. We've made improvements, move on to the next stop, measure it, A/B test it, move on to the next opportunity. Anything that then had to touch the site teams, who are the ones charged with delivering the experience, and you're like, well, they have to go to reputation.com to understand what reviews we got, and they got to see what we got in through Kingsley today, and they've got to use one site to do property management, and they've got to go use this for prospect management. And oh, by the way, these requests came in through the portal. The next thing you know, they've got 17 dashboards trying to deliver some level of feedback to the people who may just have everything from simple questions to complaints to follow-up elements, and they're leaving voicemails and emails. And we haven't made it easy for the most basic engagement, because most of the industry is largely focused on the prospect, right? We treat the resident as fungible. Someone will move out, someone will move in. So all of the investment has largely been on the money driving part of the leasing experience, right? And to make that a more consolidated, free-flowing experience. And less has really been spent on optimizing how the site teams can truly serve the residents. I totally agree with that, Scott.
And Mike, I'm really glad that you brought up site teams and how, in addition to existing residents, because I think those are two of the most often overlooked and extremely important stakeholders we have in multifamily. We're looking at after the investors, and we're looking, for the next prospect. But the site teams are really that front line. And for any technology to work, it has to be adapted and embraced by the site team. And our existing residents are also so valuable to us. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about attracting residents and what can we do and what amenity can we have and what service can we have. If we can't fix somebody's sink within 48 hours, then it doesn't matter what kind of pool or game room or golf simulator we have or dog walking service or concierge. That's not what's going to keep someone to stay. So we talked about new technologies that have come up and how they get adapted and embraced, and how they can help make the site team's life easier and not inadvertently overcomplicate it. So two things I wanted to ask about are bots and virtual tours. And I see you smile. We'll start with you. What has your experience, now you're shaking your head, what has your experience been so far with choosing to move forward or not in any capacity with bots and or virtual tours?
I've kind of come to terms with bots, and I think that they are successful as long as you are clear on the expectations for them and how they're supposed to be used. Because if you keep the information very general, maybe like what's your pet policy, what lease terms are you available or do you have available, I think that it can still be valuable, but it just doesn't ever come close enough to replace that one-on-one interaction with your human capital and your site teams. And I think that more as a consumer, I take a step back and think as a consumer, as soon as I see a bot, I'm like, oh, I instantly think I'm gonna maybe get frustrated. Like it's kind of dangled in front of me as like a good resource, but I know there's going to be a wall. There's gonna be a limit as far as I can go with it, depending upon like the product offering that you're utilizing. So I think if you temper your expectations, it can be successful, but only to a certain extent.
One reaction I have to this, and we're in the process of implementing a new bot technology on our site, and I completely agree with you, Ken. Right? Like I think bots are, if you just take a bot solution out of the box, it's almost as insufferable as like a CAPTCHA. Like you're just like, WTF, I don't want to deal with this. I want to speak to somebody real. But if you implement it well, right? And I think this is where, coming back full circle to what Scott, you were saying earlier when we were talking about technology, right? Let's not forget, I think that technology is a means to an end, right? If done right, it only enhances the transactional value that you're trying to have with your customers on a regular basis, right? And I love, I think, Mike, you were touching on, Disney, which is probably one of the best brands in the world out there, about that holistic experience that they create, right? So bots, I'm going to give you my perspective, both as a technologist and as a marketer, right? Like are incredible if you implement it well to like kind of get people who are visiting your site to kind of get them into a conversation, right? Because sometimes people don't necessarily want to be sold to, but if they do have questions or proactively that you see that they've been clicking a couple of times, there are all these ways in which you can instrument them to be really tailored to the experience you want to foster, right? So, but if you just take it out of the box, right, like Ken, what you're just saying, like that definitely resonated. You're like, hey, can I help you? Like I remember, I mean, you probably remember, some of you, the Office, like Microsoft Office back in like the 90s, right? When there's like
Microsoft
Clippy,
Bob, yeah.
right? Like Clippy, and it's like, hey, it looks like you're writing a letter. Can I help you? And you're like, GTFO, right? Like I don't need your help, Clippy. But if done right, I think about the experience sometimes, like with Google, when you see like autocorrect or like some grammar solution, like they give you a little tooltip, something like, hey, or sentence completion, right, on Gmail. I used to work with that team, and some of that stuff is really magical, right? If done right, it adheres to the principle of technology as a means. And one quote that I'm fond of that really resonates as I've kind of grown in my career as in the technology industry is, it's like that Arthur C. Clarke quote, right? Like, the science fiction writer, is that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? And I think going back full circle to how we're talking about how technology can lend itself to what we're trying to do. Technology is the means. If done right, it's almost seamless and invisible, but it only acts to enhance your brand and the experience you're trying to tailor. So, bots, if done well, awesome. If you just take the knowledge base, compile all that information, and then use the right technology, so like you can preempt the questions and serve stuff, it can be a wonderful experience. If you're just doing it bare bones, it's going to be absolutely, craptastic. So,
and those are great points, Indy. I love the TBT reference to Clippy. And we're coming up on time here, so just wanted to open it up beyond bots, beyond virtual tours. Any other strategies and tools in terms of marketing technology that you guys are using that you have found really effective or not effective or helpful at all? And we'll close with that.
I'll start and I try to keep it real simple. I think it's really understanding your customers and then tailoring whatever solutions you're going to provide to that customer demographic. As a company, I think it's great to explore technology and maybe even have a baseline set up for every asset. Every asset's going to get these components, but then taking a step back and thinking about who your renter is, what they need, how they're going to use the property and their unit and amenities. So what I may do for a student community is much different than what I would do for a senior community. And so really just taking a step back, and again, bringing it back to what Scott said, is what does the customer need? How, in Mike's portion they was discussing, like, how do we think about what type of experience we're trying to have? And then also making sure our site teams are properly trained and informed on all of these things so that there's less friction in their use. And hopefully you have some success that you can utilize for a data point to further inform your next decision for a similar asset.
All right, so I'm going to go off the board on this one in terms of a technology that we use. So my previous gig was with Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which the important piece to know about the stadium here in Atlanta is it's the first and only ever LEED Platinum stadium I think in the world, not arena, but full on stadium, 2 million square feet. I took a team over there to look at how they had done a variety of things from a sustainability standpoint. And one of the elements of implementation was a cleaning solution that didn't use chemicals. It was a proprietary solution that used ionized water, and to do it in a way that although you had to spend the capital on the equipment, your ongoing operating expenses not only didn't include chemicals, but now you were using water fundamentally as a cleaning solution, which was so much more environmentally friendly. We tried it out, loved it, and ended up moving our whole portfolio to this Genion solution. Then COVID hit. It was already 99.9% and had Fogger-based capabilities as well. So what was interesting is, although we may not think of this as it's not a marketing tool, but our ability to make sure our residents knew that when we took safety and security and the protocols associated with COVID seriously, we leaned in to tell them how, and the equipment that we're using, that not only is safe and effective, but chemical free. So our ability to fog fitness centers and in other common areas, if nothing else, hopefully gave them the comfort that we did take their safety and security is a high priority overall. And we thought and hoped that could engender even deeper levels of appreciation from our residents to us, because we were treating their homes as seriously as we could. We even used those Jenny-on foggers when we were doing maintenance requests. That's how we ensured we were keeping their living space safe when we had to go handle an emergency request during COVID. It's not a marketing technology per se, but it was a very different thing we had implemented pre-COVID for different reasons that put us in a very, very good position, both for our site teams who felt safe and our residents, because we helped them best understand how we were keeping them safe.
Well, great. Thank you so much to all of your panelists. That very forward-thinking conversation. I know there were a ton of just smiles and laughs and cheers and agreement to a lot of things that you guys were saying. So to our audience, thank you for joining us as well. Please make your way to your next session and to your one-on-one meetings. Thank you, everyone. Bye.